2, 2, good. 3, 2, good, come on. 4, 2, good, come on.
My name's Grossman. I'm a coach in New York City. I work with general population. I've been lifting since I was 12 years old. I started training for football, and then from there some injuries led me down the path of bodybuilding. Decided to go to school for exercise physiology. It has been a niche that I just couldn't find anywhere else. I mean, in the bodybuilding sphere, it's hard to find good education. You know, most of my education that's informed me about bodybuilding has actually come outside of bodybuilding. So it started, you know, reading the magazines and traveling and training with those guys and really getting into you know, the world of bodybuilding and experiencing that hands-on. And then I got a little bit older and I realized, like, okay, it was good to sort of build that initial grit and to see the lifestyle and, you know, really the mentality of those guys. But there wasn't really a lot of good knowledge in that sphere. So most of my education was outside of bodybuilding, whether it was strength and conditioning, whether it was physical therapy or functional medicine. And after stepping away from that for a little while, I wanted to find people like myself that were in the bodybuilding or in the strength sports scene, but were taking knowledge from outside and incorporating that in, you know, to really look at it from a more full perspective. And I feel like as far as bodybuilding goes, you guys do that better than anybody. I think it started with the idea of just being able to differentiate the local training stimulus for a muscle. So understanding what it was like to overload a muscle, like in a lengthened position, a shortened position, train the different heads of a muscle. You know, I'm aware that, you know, the way that you train obviously impacts, you know, specific muscles in different ways, but the way you guys broke it down made a lot more sense than anything I'd heard before. And it came back to just fundamental principles, really just of physics. And, you know, anytime you can get to those base layer principles, like, you know, you're onto something. It started with exercise selection, and that just gave me more options. Just realizing that things could be more differentiated than I thought they could be. Just realizing, like, oh, this thing, even though it looks different than this thing, is really the same. So creating just a more differentiated model of exercise selection. And then from there, it was a more differentiated model of programming. So it's really just taking, you know, each of those fields or, you know, those specific parts of training and just differentiating it a little bit more. And it kind of lives on a spectrum. It's not so black and white, like these are all separate things, but just understanding, like, where you are on that pendulum. I think that's really important, and it really helps to be able to design a program that way that just best spreads out stress or directs it specifically where you want it. Understanding the concept of, okay, like, no matter how you apply physics, like however you want to take this going forward, you can use it any way you want it. It's just a principle. And I think you guys do a good job. Like, even though you get into very specific exercise execution, if, you know, you're intellectual enough to see through that, you realize that there's a lot of first principles that just carry over. And I think that's really important. Like, if you can just put it together, like, this thing isn't so different from this thing. Like, a lot of times you hear people ask questions and they're just asking the same question over and over again. It's kind of like the exercise selection thing. It's like, yeah, but you don't even realize that every time you ask a question, you're missing the first principles. And, you know, it would be like if we were talking about, you know, like the deficit deadlift that you answered before, and it's like you're thinking about this object and you're forgetting about this human in front of you. And I think it's good to learn from people like you who's starting with the human instead of the object. So yeah, it really just comes back to understanding those first principles of physiology, physics. You know, if it's biology and then it's chemistry and then it's physics underneath, like, maybe it's not the textbook version, but the problem with trying to learn the textbook version is you don't care. And you don't really retain stuff you don't care about. So it's easier to learn the first principles when you do it in something that's relevant to you. So this is very relevant, but it also comes back to the concepts that you would get in a textbook.